So I guess I wanted to start off talking about dream infiltration, if that's good with you guys. James and Eve, you guys wanted to share a dream, but I'll just tell you what happened to me last night. I feel like I got attacked. I don't know if it was something demonic. I was telling Eve before the show. I felt like I was battling these demons. I even said this on my Discord group. Like they could have been aliens. I don't know. Then I woke up at 5 in the morning, just like really heavily bothered. So it makes me think that these dream infiltrations are something more. And here's the funny thing about it was before I went to sleep, felt like I was being touched, and I felt like something like information was going into my brain. If that makes any sense, I don't know if that sounds weird to you guys or what. But
Completely weird, Rob. There's something wrong with you.
Yeah, I think it's the norm for us. Like we've been dealing with this for a very long time, and we used to call it the reprisals. Sometimes it would come before and after a show or a support group meeting, or if you know an abduction is going to happen and you try to stop it. Sometimes weird things happen. But I had a bad night last night too. And I had to get up and pray and then listen to the David Case CD, which is something that actually I found out through James' interview with David Case, who did the anti-tinnitus, anti-V2K, voice to skull targeting technology, where you listen to a CD and it plays a certain, I don't understand the technology, but it plays those sounds in each ear in such a way that it somehow rebalances your brainwave frequency. Because when they do the V2K and the other kinds of targeting, they target and identify you through brainwave frequency. And then once they have it, they could lock in on it and then always use that to do like telepathic hacks and stuff or other things through frequency. So it kind of scrambles it so that they're not as easily able to find you in the same way. And I don't know if you found success with this, James, because I know you interviewed David Case, and maybe you have more details on his history and if you think this CD works with what you've run into.
David is an electronic engineer, and he specializes in frequencies. So he'd come up with he was putting forth a patent for a computer system that worked on electrons, if memory serves. So when he put the patent submission in, that's when he wound up on the radar of the bad guys, and they started beaming him and all this other stuff. And that went on for a while. Then he realized, well, I am an electrical engineer, so I might as well not take the sitting down. So he started playing around with a bunch of frequencies, and he found a certain frequency coupled with a particular type of a headset, which essentially decouples one from the computer algorithm targeting system, that looks for people's brainwave patterns, right? So, and, he's gotten a lot of results from it. So that was the reason why he created it. It was necessity was the mother of invention. They were beaming him and putting the voice to skull in, so he had to do something about it. And, fortunately, he came up with this method. So it was an example of awakening a sleeping tiger. If they just left him alone, maybe he wouldn't have done this, but, he did this. But yeah, there's a lot of that going on. So I feel for you, Robert, because I've been on the receiving end of astral dreamscape manipulation, dream hacks, and demonic infiltration myself. So I know what it's like.
I mean, because I'm not an experiencer myself, or at least Nate said I might be, but I don't have any memories of it. But one thing I do really believe is I believe I'm heavily targeted, from gang stalking to like thoughts in my mind and like the whole nine, like
Yeah.
I really truly dream or crazy dreams. Like, I don't know. I just feel like, so I've been doing a lot of research into the targeted individual thing lately to try to find out like what's going on with it and what, and what they're using. And if it's the aliens or if it's AI or if it's the government or if it's all three. What do you guys think?
It's all
I
three.
think sometimes it's all three. Sometimes it's all three.
Yeah, in fact, I was just going to interject because I mentioned this to Rob, and I only kind of found out this week, but I had heard about it through a Harold Kautzvella interview some time ago, a few months ago maybe, and then I heard it again on another August this year interview. But I guess there's a real technology that it's probably patented by Raytheon, and it's used to create a frequency that gets into the mind of the person, and then it has an AI quantum computing learning module that you have sending and receiving of whatever's in our minds if we can be locked in brain frequency through thinking process. And it's basically, if you're more mental than like heart intuitive, then it's easier to lock in on a send receive AI quantum learning. So what they do is they could read your mind with this frequency, this technology, and there's an acronym word for it, but I don't remember what it's called. But I guess long story short, there was some people who I guess maybe worked for the company, or they knew somebody who did, and they had done research on this years ago. I don't know how long ago, but he said between 60 and 70% of the population is easily manipulated. It's basically a consciousness overlay frequency technology that uses AI quantum learning to predict and know the thought processes. So once they know and they lock in, then they could basically start inserting the thoughts that people who don't know the difference, and they're mostly on a mental binary, he calls it the binary human, which is, well, he describes it. Anyway, so they're easily manipulated to think they're thinking their own thoughts, but they're functioning within the consciousness overlay control system. So these are the people that are sent around, the ones who are not predictable, who are functioning from an unpredictable, spontaneous, heart-centered spirit kind of people who are like sold, I guess. And then they will, then they deliberately send, he said they deliberately send gang stalkers on those people to try to corral and manipulate them according to what they would want them to do, or to maybe just test and tweak them because they're not operating within the easily controlled 60 to 70% that they've got. So as part of this interview that Harold Kaltzvela did, he did mention the jab and how that would pop the soul out so that people are operating more on a mental or a binary, like thoughts and sexual chakra binary consciousness frequency, which is easy to entrain and overlay for control systems. So for a zombie control, and then those 60 to 70% of the human population are used and corralled against those who are not. So the part of the argument was that he stated, it was like, wait a minute, there's, how, I don't know how many groups there are, like truthers. Oh, we got to wake people up. The whole job is to wake people up about, the shit that you already know, right? That's true. And then you want to take the ball and run with it, and not try to waste your time waking up the 60 to 70% who already are on that path. So
there's no time for that.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, once you know that and you're like, okay, let's just work with the 30% that know. And then let's work from a different perspective of stopping fighting unnecessarily it's basically like trying to fight the narcissist bully who is going to be always predictable to do the same thing and never really be woken up or do the recovery work. So it's like we have to use a new strategy based on what we really know that they're doing. But what's interesting is this technology can explain a lot of what has been reported with some of the quote alien love bite behaviors of, let's say, someone suddenly doing the 180 switching off on someone, whereas they knew this person, they might have been in the family or in a relationship, and then after a particular event, and then Harold actually mentioned this on another interview where the example was there was a woman who came in to complain about, like, I guess her husband. No, she didn't complain. She was going to get a divorce from one of her husband who worked for Raytheon, or he had a friend who worked for them. So they were like in this good old boy club who had access to this secret technology that does the consciousness control thing. So they said, okay, no problem. We'll make sure that, she doesn't divorce you, basically. So within 24, 48 hours, they plug her into this technology with their secret access, because they work for the company, this little good old boy club. And then she decides suddenly that she's in love with her husband again and doesn't want to get a divorce. So switching off, switching on, consciousness control. So this is already in the hands of even private or companies. But I still maintain the original question Rob had, is this alien? Is this human? Is this military? I believe the aliens probably had it first, and they're much more refined and smooth with it. Whereas in the hands of, military and the other companies, you're going to see a more overt effect, like a more sudden 180 that is just anomalous behavior. So we know this is happening now, and that I think there's more people that they're more easily affected by this because of the spirit jumping out of their body and turning them into a more entrainable person mentally.
Yeah, I'm going to add something here too. I had the V2K voice to skull harassment since the early 80s, not long after my abduction, since, my childhood, around 7 or 8 years old, somewhere in there. And not just that, but I think that these technologies were actually handed to, the U.S. military and various militaries under some type of a treaty after Eisenhower, right around that time, and then just kind of developed from there. I think it started probably late 40s, early 50s. And that's going back to some memories I have of a lifetime that was before this, when I was first abducted and then thrown into these things. So this has been going on for a long time. And if you look in society, if you look at our entertainment and everything else, it's trying to get us away from that heart-centered way of thinking and over to, just an analytical kind of like more of an emotional response type of behavior, to where everybody has a short attention span. Everything has to have some sort of a reward to it, like an instant one, and everything is pretty much shallow, and they've conditioned us to fall into this. And that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing not just that, but a complete, I would say overall a social destruction is taking place across the planet. Or, everything is falling apart. Most people seem to lack a moral compass today to some degree or another, and society's falling apart itself. It's all part of a systematic, it's a program in every aspect.
So, James, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, to add to what Nathan said, it's a complete takedown of society. It's the moral compass has been reversed for so many people for a long time. Concepts like truth, what have you, have been made relative terms, right? So with this Bolshevik Luciferian mass subjugation of society, in true narcissistic fashion, they've scaled it up. It's their insanity becomes your insanity, or society's insanity. The normalization of things that we would find abominable, reprehensible. They've been gradually, incrementally putting that stuff in our faces for a long time, and now they're doing it by leaps and bounds, because there is no safety net anymore. There's no impulse control. Like Nathan said, they're pushing these emotional hot buttons. People can't sit and have a reasoned debate anymore because they get so easily triggered. And a lot of that has to do with this en masse, population-wide, demonic, psychotronic manipulation. And everything is scaled up and it's scaled down. It's happening in the classrooms. It's happening internationally through satellite television, the same types of memes and themes. And what I wanted to ask you, Robert, is what have been the demonic themes that have been popping up in your dreams lately? What's been the nature of your attacks? Like, for example, you mentioned you felt like you were being touched. The onset sometimes of these nocturnal attacks is in the hours leading up to going to sleep. Sometimes one starts hearing bumps on the walls, like cracking sounds on the walls or popping noises, what have you. Seems to me sometimes they're tuning in at that stage. But in the demonic realm, they can just open up a portal or just jump right into your astral dreamscape and start doing things, plunge you into a hellish kind of nocturnal dimension. So what's it been like for you lately?
It's so hard to tell, like, if it's demonic or what, because I was in like pain lately because I was going through like some issues. So I had a lot of my healer friends trying to send me like energy, so like sometimes when I go to bed, it feels like someone's putting hands on me, like someone's like doing some Reiki or energy, but I don't know if that could be like the demons, the aliens, like trying to like tap into my body as well. Like last night when I went to sleep, and I woke up and it felt like information was being like funneled into my brain. Like I could sense energy going like directly into my brain, and it made me like it freaked me out to a point where it made me like get out of like, and I felt like something was touching me, and I was like, this doesn't seem right. I don't hear bumps on the wall, but something doesn't seem right about it. You know what I mean? So then I got up and I went outside and I smoked, and I was kind of just like kind of freaked out about it. And then I came back in, I went to bed, and that's when I had the dream. And in this dream, we were like just encountering like demonic elements, and they kept like torturing me, but then they like, you know, like we're like fighting them off. I'm with like a group of people, it seems like, and then it seems like they're torturing me because they keep coming back. And it's like it seems so exhausting. Like when I woke up, I was exhausted. Like I woke up at 5 a.m. because I barely got any sleep. I was out. I was in the dream state for 3 hours. I would say I was in, or maybe 4, from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. And I woke up and I was just like exhausted, completely exhausted, you know. And I kind of just kind of reflected on it, and I should have wrote what happened down, but I didn't. So that's all I can really remember, if that makes any sense. I don't know.
Yes, it does. And now there's two ways to look, or two or more ways to look at the information download that was occurring. Sometimes what happens is when we're getting a nighttime download from, lack of a better term, friendly or benevolent, graceful forces, the other side doesn't like that. So they mete out reprisals to you. Like I've known of cases where people were getting useful higher source information. Suddenly the telephone rings. Suddenly some other disruption occurs to break that connection. So it's possible something like that happened, or what you were getting, the download or the beaming, was just a precursor to what was to come. They were like locking in or something, but they do work in concert with each other. For example, if someone is an alien abductee and they're having, you know, a series of experiences going back to childhood, and sometimes in some cases previous incarnations, what'll happen is, because these entities are definitely in cahoots with the government, for lack of a better term, like Nathan says, and because so many of these government operators and military aerospace operators are entity infested, hosted themselves, they're plugged into this hive consciousness thing, aided and abetted by all the instantaneous communication technology, the AI, everything else. So they will work in sync with one another, where I've seen it many times where someone's developing their metaphysical abilities, developing their powers, and they peak out at a certain point, and suddenly all hell is unleashed upon them. Suddenly helicopters are showing up instantaneously, and I would submit that those aren't typical, you know, black ops helicopters. When they can just show up like that, some of those are masquerading alien craft that can show up all of a sudden but look like helicopters, and that's well embedded in the UFO research, that UFOs can do this. So suddenly the black helicopters show up, but because they link in hive consciousness fashion at all levels, suddenly there's people parked outside of your house, there's people driving back and forth, there's people making confrontational issues with you on the street or in the store all of a sudden, because David Case pointed out, because, and you know, going back to the Raytheon type technology that Evie was talking about, their ability to link into so many people at one time, or conversely, tap into one individual in a room and either mind control them, beam them, or activate them in some way, and make that one person confront you, right? Or confront somebody who's being targeted. And I've seen it happen. I was at a conference in, I can't remember where it was, High Desert of Southern California, and Evie remembers Bill and Pam Hamilton. And there was this kind of weird ruffian couple that walked in. They looked like they just walked in from a bar doing heavy drinking or something. And they walked in and they immediately started harassing and messing with Pam, and reduced her to tears because they were so threatening to her. Then they just walked off after yelling some curse words and what have you. But that's an example I saw in real time of people just come in off the street into a conference and target one individual. So their ability, these aliens, and working through underneath them, these hybridized humans, these black ops, and also the shadow people, intrusive voice phenomena that goes on, they really do work in sync, because the voices, intrusive thoughts start kicking in. And as Jerry Marzinski points out, they're always negative thoughts. They're always degrading. They're not uplifting. They're not positive, harmonious thoughts. They're all meant to drag us down in one way or another. So they like to keep us in the state of instability, of high anxiety, verging on despair and hopelessness. And I've been working with people in the recent past that have had gang stalking issues, and it really is across the board. Like an individual can go out and seek help or join some martial arts studio or whatever the case may be. And it turns out that those institutions are likewise infiltrated. And they may not have been infiltrated to begin with, but because of their ability to plug into one vulnerable person in that organization or group, then they can start talking and working through that individual. And it really creates a Truman Show aspect. And you begin to think, am I the one going crazy with all these people acting up all over the place? And one final thought, I'll pass it on to Nathan or whoever wants to talk about it, is David also pointed out, and I've observed this myself, and Evie just observed that. She told me about a recent experience where if a targeted individual is being besieged by the color blue, they can work it out. So they can reroute all these people wearing blue garments, all these motorists driving blue cars, and just kind of route them to a place where the targeted individual happens to be standing. And it just seems like, well, everyone that's passing by is wearing a blue hat, a blue jacket, a blue shirt. Every car that's driving by is blue. And so when these people turn and explain this to a normie or an abnormie, as I call them, right? It's like, oh, you're just crazy. You're just seeing things. No, that's well within their capabilities to do these things. So really, it's just to keep us in a state of high anxiety. And, you know, to the degree we're getting interference, just shows the level of fear and apprehension they have towards us as individuals, our potential innate power. So, you know, keep that in mind, Robert. You're a special person. That's why they're messing with you. But you will overcome.
You know what I wanted to say? I was after I did a show last night, and I was on until like I would say like 8:30 or 9, maybe East Coast time. So I had to walk over to my friend's apartment, which is like 4 blocks away. I told Eve this before we started recording today too. And as I was walking over to my friend's house, this Jeep passed me really slow. And it was a black Jeep. It didn't look like Black Ops or anything, but I thought that they were trying to rob me at first. I had no clue. And I was a little bit worried because I had a little bit of cash on me. So that happened. And then that same Jeep, I'm not really kidding you, on the way from my apartment to my friend's apartment, it passed me 4 times. And every time they passed me, it passed me slow. The only thing I did was I just pretended like I was on my phone, because I figured like if they try to do something, then I can just make a call real quick or record it or whatever is going to happen. I wanted to kind of document it, but then they didn't do anything. But I just found that really strange, you know? So I definitely feel like something is happening to me. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I definitely feel something's going on. I do.
I have a few things to add here. From what I've figured out from my experiences is that they pretty much hacked our reality and have created, there's a mosquito in here. So if I go like this, that's what it is. They've created kind of an augmented reality overlay. So what they've done is they've essentially created a transdimensional AI planetary consciousness simulation. They have allowed the US military and other militaries who have these agreements to have certain access to this, where they chaperone them and they run these horrible programs. And I have one piece of advice: if you want to get rid of the dream hacking, sleep apnea works perfect for that, because you'll never get into that state where you dream. It's kind of a joke, but I haven't had dreams for years. That's one of the ways that I was kind of able, to get out of that. But the other way is, even from a child, probably, I would say when I was roughly about 15 is when this started. I became more and more aware of, what was going on with me. I was more interested in these things. I started doing research at 14, and I started to notice that I could actually control my dreams. And that was a great way to stop that, because I would, completely wipe out the attacker, or I would just completely just switch the dream off and go to something nice. And there's a lot of things that you can do with that. So that was something I've always been able to do. So they've always had problems with me. Now, the psychic street theater stuff, I've had plenty of experiences like that, where I would leave the house to run some errands and I would sense that something was going to happen. I even knew what it was, because they were like setting me up for it. They were letting me know they were doing it. And then I would go to a food store and I'd sit out in the parking lot. I'm like, I can't go in here. Something's going to happen. So so one day I went to 3 different stores, and by the time I got to the third one, it was the same feeling. I just went in, and sure enough, I had problems with, several people that were completely abnormal. And I went through a period like that where I don't know how many years it was probably 5 or 6, where I was constantly having these experiences. And then they kind of cycle you out of that. At least that's what they did with me. They put me into some other things that I had to go through. But I've been through all of this stuff. So I will say this, over the last couple of months, I have not had any attacks, which, knock on wood, because it could happen at any time. And all that says to me is that, the low level attacks may have stopped because something's changed within me. But at the same time, what's next? Am I going to get, the heavy entity attacks after this? So it's just it's a progression. You can either stay in one place and be cycled through these events, or you can progress on your own and then get hit harder later. But they're going to keep coming after you because they're relentless, and they're very malevolent. I mean, they try to destroy your life. I've actually had a situation where we had a mattress, and I had to cut it in half to get rid of it. It was like a memory foam mattress. My wife was holding it up, and I had this electric carving knife, and I could feel something was trying to get my hand to go into the blade. And then I stopped. I went into the kitchen, and I wound up injuring myself with a pair of salad tongs because it made me put my finger into the rear of the tong and then release the spring. And then I saw this massive energy float around me, like heat coming off of a pavement. And I knew what it was going to do because it went right into the living room where my wife was waiting for me, and I knew it was going to make her agitated. So when we got done, she sits down with this long face, and I'm like, "What's the matter?" It was a rhetorical question. And she goes, "I don't know. I just feel really grouchy all of a sudden." And that was the energy. And I referred to that because I didn't know what it was, and I was being lied to by ETs. That was supposedly a psychic storm. When negative energy builds up in the environment, it takes a life of its own, but it has everything to do with them and their transdimensional AI. Yeah. And another thing too, when you activate or become more psychically open, as you start to awaken, it sets off the AI system. They've literally got a gulag around this planet, and they're looking for people like us, and they hunt people like us. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's pretty much what it is. And they are very, very afraid, because when I finally got to the point where they've tried everything with me and things came to a head, which was exactly a year ago yesterday, which is my anniversary of separating myself from this military program by destroying the silver cords. That's when the U.S. military started to speak to me through artificial, telepathy from White Sands. And they said flat out, because I asked them, I said, "Why did you do this to me?" He said, "To preserve the continuity of the government." I don't know what government he's referring to, but obviously it's the one that Klaus Schwab is trying to create, not the one that I grew up under with, the Constitution. So that's the ugly reality. We're at war with them. Yeah. It's a Cold War right now, but eventually it's going to go hot. And that's what they're worried about, because you have the split soul phenomenon where your higher self can exit and actually carry out a mission, and they're scared to death of that because we're like sleeper cells to them. That's what they told me. And that's why they said that they went after me for 2 consecutive lifetimes. Starting in the first lifetime, I was abducted at 7, and then 6 in this one. And it's been hell ever since. But I can say one thing: after I separated from them, they did everything they could, to get me, but I'm still here, and I'm doing a lot better now. So thank God for that. And thank God for you two, for the fact that you're out there telling the truth, and you're not afraid to speak up, and you're not afraid to, to put this information out there. I'm one of the only people, probably the only person I know that actually has a documented situation with Rex from the Leak Project. I emailed him, and they put an implanted like a dreamscape into him to, completely frighten him away from me. And I've got it documented. You would think that would get me someplace, but, some recognition, but it seems like it just scares more people away. And that's part of the problem here.
I'm trying to remember what I was going to say now, but because I've had some things relatively recently It kind of goes into, it's not just a dream hack. It was being shown, like, you know how sometimes these beings, they'll taunt you with it's like a taunting saying, well, we have control. They'll show you a dream, or they'll enter your dreamscape to show you how they have control over a particular person or a group that you know. And then you find out, but the group doesn't know, or the person doesn't know, or they're just messing with you. But then I was shown something about, and this was a conversation I had with another friend who actually saw something similar, but it was a spiritual group, a church, where I was shown by the head entity that was running the entire church, who had co-opted it. And it was in one of these dreamscapes that it was like, I knew it was like a false theater because it felt fake. It wasn't like real. And then the being showed itself to me. It was acting actually proud and I don't know how to say it. There's a certain feel of these beings. And I think it was a high level Anunnaki or a white, what they call the albino reptilian royal type. And it was dressed as a human, a very, very like 7-foot tall Caucasian, kind of like royal English royalty kind of look, all dressed in white. And it was showing me that it was like the head of this particular church. It like ran the church. It co-opted the entire church, and it was really proud of it. Like it was getting in all the worship energy. And so this being came up to me and it had no shoes on, but wearing all white. And then it put its foot up on like this bench thing that I was standing close to, so that he could make sure that I saw his foot, and then part of his ankle, and above his ankle, the skin. He says, please, feel how soft my skin is. And it was like very white and pale. And I noticed his toenails, and I touched his skin. It was almost like a thing they do. Like if they allow you to touch their skin on their lower leg or their feet, it's like an act of, bequeathing the honor to trust you to touch their feet. It was a really weird thing. But then when I looked at his toes, he had 10 toes on each foot. And each of the toes were like very well manicured and buffed, like a royal would get a pedicure. And it was basically gloating that it owned this entire church, and that it was running, the people in the entire church. And it just kind of floored me that it wanted to show me that. I prayed about it though beforehand to want to know the truth, and to be continually tuned in to what my spirit is going to tell me about this particular church and a group of people. And then it showed me, but it kind of floored me the way it did that, with the whole foot thing and with the toes, So that was another thing that was shown, and how it was basically gloating over its control over this organization. But the other thing that the friend,
harvest, right? I'm sorry, I was just going to ask you. They're loosh harvesting, right?
yes, and the thing is, it didn't have a malevolent, evil, want to get you kind of feel. It was more like it was gloating over that they own this church and it's theirs, and we'll honor you. You join the church, you're ours, and we'll give you favors. You can touch my feet. And it was like a act of honor, but they didn't have an evil, typical reptilian feel. But this conversation I guess had come up because another friend of mine had mentioned on a video, and even privately, that they went to a funeral, and it was a funeral of a friend where they went to a church where the service was held. But psychically, when she went into the church, she saw this big interdimensional, I guess she saw it in her third eye, and like sensed like this entity egregore thing that was like this big tube worm-like structure thing, that as if it was there to like suck in all the worship energy, the grief energy, or just, it was like the egregore of the church that funneled the energy to it, like another dimensional realm or another entity that was feeding off of that. So I believe that this kind of thing goes on, and that there's groups of people who can be kind of corralled and controlled under certain entities. And that's what happens when and this goes into some of the Harold Kaltzavela insights in a different way of perceiving things, like from a shamanic. If you can go into the astral and you perceive with your clairvoyant faculties what's going on in all these different layers of the astral, and the interdimensional, hyperdimensional beings that work in layers in and around and through people and groups of people, like hierarchies, then you can see, who's pulling the strings of who. And I remember years ago, and this was somebody James and I knew, and I think you had him on a show one time, James, and I did an article write-up, and it was I don't know if the guy was German, but he had a female partner who did these healing sessions with people. And then one of the main types of entities that they kept running into, they called them the octopus feeders. So they were like these gargantuous octopus astral egregoric beings that would, have like the big head with like multiple tails, and then they would affect like thousands of people. And then, many different people would be hooked into something, but it would be hooked into the egregore of the octopus being. And so this same type of being was described by Harold Kautz-Vella, that there was he says that there's three major entity attachments that control humans more or less. Like, that's how we're so entrapped here with all these dramas and manipulations with narcissists, and seemingly like you feel like you've done all your work, but then you keep running into these things like they're arranged, like interdimensionally. So he was saying that, I think it was something like, I don't know, there's a spider being, and there's a Kraken, which is the octopus being, and then there's the Kundalini serpent being, which is associated with the Kundalini, which I found very interesting, because a lot of people aren't willing to admit that the whole Kundalini snake thing is actually an attachment that can control and give people power, but it's also part of an artificial attachment thing that could affect people on a spiritual level. And then these three major types of entities, then they can control and manipulate groups of people, and why and how you interact with others or be attracted to others, like in terms of romantic partners and stuff. So there's so much more going on all these different levels,
Hey, what's out of
please
these?
continue.
I'm sorry, James. I
Please.
just wanted to ask Eve, and I wanted to ask you as well. Do you think these entities are actually AI, or do you think that they're actually real, or is it a combination of the two? Because that's the area that I'm not quite astute in. I think it's AI predominantly, but I could be wrong. It seems like there's in the the animal kingdom and like in nature there are parasites, so maybe there'd be ones on the astral. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I remember years ago, I don't remember his name. It was a guy who was doing implant removals. And he would talk about one that was frequently found. It was like a black box near people's heads, and it was called the chatterbox. But it's almost like it's an artificial construct that keeps, they're like inserted in your field, and then you get this telepathic chatter shit going on, and different kinds of like implant shapes that seem artificial, like, boxes and squares, which seem more, artificial than natural, that would show up in different ways. So I really think there is like a quantum learning kind of thing going on. Like maybe this is associated with the beast in the Revelation thing, where the beast, all this quantum learning thing, it gets more and more powerful to execute its power. And I think it functions on like the mental chakra and a lot of times the sexual energy. So if attachments can happen there, and then people function through these chakras because their heart is not like really connected with their spirit because they're shut down, or they're like, they're not in their bodies, then they're going to be more easily manipulated by these forces,
Yeah, well, that's what I tell people. In order, I'm sorry. Why don't you go ahead?
Oh, Jay? No. I just want to say real quick that I think that it could be both, because what some people with the etheric third eye vision, the psychic vision, can see is these almost mechanical, robotic looking spider thingies that seem to work through digital devices. I mean, they can pop out on people's computer monitors, etc. But there seems to be an analog between the AI and some of the things that are out there in this or other dimensions. Like, for example, I've never done ayahuasca, but people tell me that when they've taken it and they go on the ayahuasca trip, they see a bewildering variety of entities. And one of the most commonly reported ones are snakes. And Evie just mentioned that with these snake entities, there really are cases of a snake or a worm-like entity, and that's what the women who have had this describe it as such, being implanted into their vaginas. where
Oh,
they
yeah.
could, and when Robert was talking about being touched and poked and prodded, almost like he was being worked on, that's a very real aspect of this, where in an interdimensional sense, we can be medically, surgically operated on, for lack of a better term, where something elsewhere is being done to our energy bodies, but it's having a direct impact on our physical bodies. And one of these things is implantation of these snake worm things in women's vaginas, but there's also the snake entities that embed themselves not only the humans, but the reptilians, Dracos, and other beings. And they grow based on how much worship energy or loosh or anxiety energy they're receiving. So I think they work in concert. I think they do. The AI works with these interdimensional entities, and I think that the whole demiurge is it's not only this natural or supernatural force that's growing and spreading its tendrils in every direction, but there's an AI component to it too. AI is not new. It's not hasn't been discovered on our planet. It's been out there all along, all this time. It just finally made its way to our little corner of the multiverse. So anyhow,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say real quick, it makes me think of like the cases when they talk about like Enki and Thoth and the serpent knowledge. It makes me think that they put that out there for like a psyop almost, because then when you look in the Gnostic text, like you said, the demiurge, but the archons are actually supposedly serpents too, which is really interesting.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to add is I was involved for 7 months in this group called the Joy of Satan, which is a virtual temple complex. Yeah, it's the name, the oxymoron of a name that actually caught my attention when I was looking, because I was searching for 2 years. I had a pretty powerful 3 weeks of psychic experiences after I had a really horrible allergic reaction to Singular, the allergy drug, and then I started having these psychic events, and I was told to go look for people like myself. So I looked for 2 years. That's how I found this Joy of Satan, and I was programmed to go in there. As it turns out, from what I understand, it was a cult being run under something called Project Ibis, which is essentially an engineered false awakening, or a false white light, or a false occult awakening for the star seeds, apparently. And this was an offensive maneuver to shut down or derail the awakening, to reduce the risk that we all pose to them. So they're creating these virtual temple complexes. And one of the things that we did frequently in this was we removed these attachments, and some of them did look like worms. There was all sorts of different weird devices, spiky things they'd stick in your third eye, things that look like a grub, a worm, a parasite of some kind. And one of the things that they always do in these new age cults, or any of it actually, is they will put people together in a group through a process that I call subconscious psychic networking. And that's where they bring people together. And that's where these love bite things come from too. And they'll give somebody the ability to heal the rest of the group, and then have that person, that's the healer, and then everybody else gets abused. And then sometimes the healer will have somebody that actually helps them, but they make these little groups, and then they just knock the hell out of you with this stuff. And that's one of the things that I noticed. And I've noticed that's something that you see with these starseed influencers that are out there today, creating these virtual temple complexes. It's the same exact pattern. They'll have a healer friend that'll help remove the attachments, even though the person is actually being manipulated to work for the program, to recruit others in order to set these scenarios up. They themselves still have some low-level attacks. They generally don't get injured. They're more of a nuisance, but they also create a support system around, the guru, to make them, because they have to be attacked as well, because otherwise it just wouldn't feel right. It wouldn't be the right experience to motivate that person. A lot of times they'll use, like if they do a video, for example, and they talk about a certain subject, they'll set up a reptilian attack or some other type of psychic attack, not as a reward, but as a way of reinforcing their behavior so that they think they've done something good. But in fact, what they've done is pushed alien propaganda to a large number of people, which is facilitated by big tech, because they shadow ban people like us who talk about these issues that are out there to warn people. And then they prop up those who are completely innocent in the way they're thinking most of the time, but they're out there recruiting people in order to set more of this up. And that's how they take more of us down and compromise us. And it completely corrupts you. Plus, you have the false AI source experience where people think they're talking with God, but in fact, it over time, you can always see the end result. They become more corrupted. So, and that's a big problem today. It's very, very risky, because I'm sure right now as we speak, somebody's teenager is looking at the Joy of Satan website or some other website, and it looks good, and they're being motivated at a subconscious level, to sign up and join and become another victim. And for those people who are outliers and not a Milab, you can become a Milab and become hijacked by getting involved in these groups, because once you open yourself up to this, and if you're the right person that they're looking for, because they want people that have psychic abilities, whether they're active or not, they're looking for them. As soon as you activate, the AI system wants to herd you into these virtual temple complexes. And this is something I've been talking about, but it hasn't been gaining much, traction, because people simply don't want to hear about it. They want to hear about, the good, love, and light. What's the good news? What's the Galactic Federation update? When in fact, it's like the Pied Piper leading everybody to slaughter. So
Yeah, I would agree. And because I had an experience with a group, but I don't want to say what group it was, but it was a type of group that, let's say somebody who's recovering from their weird experiences, whether it's Milab abductions or just exploring it and wanting to get involved in another group to maybe do remote viewing or learn telepathic contact or get more involved with connecting with Gaia or something. And then it could be a group led by a charismatic person who has abilities, and then it's an entrapment scheme to get them in a culty thing. And then things start happening to that group that's deliberately done with technology and sorcery and black magic to basically handle and destroy the person if they can't use them as an operative for their own agenda. So I've experienced that too, where it was pretty difficult to extract myself from, and it was very life-threatening and very scary. And most of the people who were involved in it, they had no idea, and I couldn't talk to them, but people had come to me later and reported on the same person that they had a very negative experience with them. But most people, I mean, based on what I experienced, it could really kill you, or it could really turn you, or just I could understand why people just are really quiet and just don't go further with any whistleblowing after a certain point. But yeah, and it is technology.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to martyr yourself. I mean, I did a psychic reading with a friend on someone that I met in the Farsight forum, from the Farsight Institute. And she lived in Oregon. And we did a simple psychic reading. I did a little bit of information I got from my so-called ETs, which are AI, and my friend was doing the same thing. But I was horrified afterward to find out that they had horrible events take place in their lives for months. They nearly lost their house. The husband lost his job, and it got so bad that he asked his wife, he goes, "Do you think it had anything to do with those psychics that you talked to?" And that's something that's a big problem, because they'll hijack someone and then use that person to get to, to other people. Simon Parks is a good example of this. And then, I'm not here to trash Simon. He's a victim of this, but it's well documented. He started a group, basically a virtual temple complex. He was working with people doing psychic work, readings and stuff. And the women were reporting that an entity that looked like Simon, along with other reptilians, were coming into a dream or into their room at night and actually astrally raping them. And then Simon had to answer for it. And, I don't believe it was him. I think it was something that was masquerading as him and using him as a vector in order to do this to people. So you can get hurt just by getting a psychic reading in this community. It just depends on who you talk to. And that's something that, how do you know? Well, you really don't. You really don't. You have to go by feedback, and you have to be very cautious.
Yeah, it takes talking and not gossiping, but really reflecting and testing on what your perceptions are before you make assumptions. Because a lot of times they do use people's images for things, and that should try to make you think something about someone and then gossip about them and create all this dissension. So that's true. I'm trying to I saw a video with, I don't think I sent it to you, but it was a 2018 video with Brett Stewart, who's the remote viewing guy of, I don't know, Remote Viewing Technical Institute. And it was an interview he did with Carrie Cassidy. But I don't think he has this company anymore, but it was something very interesting that he remote viewed that I noticed simply because of my work with Dr. Corrado Malanga. But long story short, he remote viewed a underground pyramid structure in a tundra cold location, I think in Russia, but it could have been North America, where he noticed that this ancient pyramid was like a technology that had high frequency light and sound that came in several directions with, let's say, a human being sitting in a chair, and then it would affect their consciousness. So they became multidimensionally aware in a way that was really beyond our human identity, personality, consciousness. And that once this person maybe made a choice to do this, like a major initiation of some sort, then because their consciousness was so expanded, maybe it didn't fit into their human body avatar. And so they got new human bodies that were like cloned, modified bodies. So he talked about how he saw this in a remote viewing with others when they got their new modified body after they went through the change of this multidimensional consciousness. The body was a larger body. It was actually taller. And I don't know if it was Caucasian or if it mattered what race, but he described the body and the presence of this being. When that being was in front of you and trying to communicate, its presence was so vast, and its eyes would light up very, very bright white light, like shooting out, so that a normal human couldn't handle like the light and the consciousness. It could like burn your face, or it would be like, it made me remember, like, how Moses with the burning bush, or these Anunnaki beings, if they had the glowing eyes, you couldn't look at them directly. And so the interaction with these beings who had this consciousness, that's how their presence was. But the way he described it, and this was that I think a lot of people don't know, in Dr. Corrado Malanga's work, where he has a hierarchy of aliens based on his research with alien abductees and doing these regressions and finding out a type of hierarchy of the different kinds of beings that are responsible for mostly the abductions, where they're basically imposing their will on us and using our spirits as a battery or causing us to be recycled. And so the top head honcho on top of the Horus Ra being was the being he called the primordial man, also known as Adam Kadmon. But it was like kind of like a male figure in a robe, but with like the super bright shining eyes. And it was a type of being that was seen numerous times by people, where it was connected to the soul of the person, so that they would come back over and over again to be recycled by this being. But what's interesting is that Robert Stanley years ago, I don't know if you've heard of Robert Stanley, like it was like 30 years ago, had an encounter with this primordial man being. And it was a very, very profound experience that probably had a spiritual impact on him.
Was he referring to him as Enki?
Yes, and he was. And then I don't know if he changed his mind, but see, Robert Stanley was on a show, I don't know whose it was, 6 months ago, and he had joined the Order of Melchizedek, which is, a high occult order that supposedly is helping mankind in some benevolent way. But in my view, when I saw that thing that Brett Stewart talked about, and then the being, what it reminded me of was like, wait a minute, I think there's a type of being that, let's say they had a deal where they could become like gods with this technology underneath this grand pyramid, but then in order to maintain this consciousness, they had to go into different kinds of like cloned created bodies, and then they would be able to interact in this multidimensional level, in and out of time and space, in and out of our reality, but they had to be in this form. But they would be basically acting like gods to many of the beings that they interact with on these different levels. But my sense is, I don't know why I picked up on this, I feel like it's a type of being that is what we call the Metatronic Cube 12D trap, that you can be a god in this 12D cube trap, but you can't get beyond it. So it's like, well, you can become a god in this realm, but you don't go beyond the 12D cube. And this is like the ones who are pretending to be gods, and they cause us to be recycled, but they're not like the real God of the all that is. So, but most people don't see this particular type of being in their experiences because it's actually rare. But when you do find it, then you know, well, that's the primordial man. He's like a head honcho type of being. So I don't know if anybody else had seen that particular remote viewing type of interview, because a lot of people haven't heard. They don't know what's going on with this Brett Stewart guy. I don't even know if he has his remote viewing type of institute anymore, because what he saw was really incredible. I think that they wanted to put a lid on it and not talk about it, actually.
Was that called technical intuition?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. He took all of his videos down. He had some great work because it coincided with the Farsight Institute's remote viewing of what happens after you die and you're recycled. They actually remote viewed a council that was in control of the solar system. They were very negative, arrogant individuals. And they also showed that some people do get out of the matrix. These were probably, what you could call the angelics or the primes. They're rescued out of here, but everybody else just constantly gets recycled. And they also remote viewed a soul fracturing process where it looked like something was being removed from the person and they were being sent back, like it was going to the cloud. So they were stripping away the memories, is what they were seeing. Because on the astral, or the AI will present itself the way it wants you to understand it. So that's from my experience, but that's what they were seeing. So and the other thing too, the whole Anunnaki story is a stepping stone to get people off of the mainstream religion into this false awakening stuff. And that was the foundational beliefs, for the joy of Satan. It all has the same theme. You can be a god.
Yes.
And that taps into something that, people have been sent here to actually activate, to do something positive. It hijacks it and it gives them this, delusion that they can be a god and not who they really are.
Yeah.
And to do what they're supposed to. So it's an elaborate program that they've set up. And I would say, the joy of Satan was a real education for me, because everything that we've talked about, Eve, they've literally incorporated that into one thing. And you mentioned to me, it sounds experimental, and it absolutely is, because this is one of the first bigger cults that they've incorporated all of these strategies in. Yet it comes at the advent of social media, creating the virtual temple complex. So instead of building a pyramid or a temple and going through all of that work like they did in the ancient times, now they can build one in a matter of minutes, creating a forum, setting up somebody in the same exact way they did before, and then programming a larger group of people. So basically, their evil has gone viral, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, this reminds me of something that I heard many years ago. It was a MK Ultra Monarch programmed survivor named Beth Gooby, and she had, I think, done some interviews, but mostly written interview testimony. And this was like probably the year 2000-ish. I don't even know, but I remember her talking about how they were creating astral, how can I call it, like astral grids of energy, mostly made out of sexual energy and probably a human sacrifice energy as well. But one of the ways that she was utilized is that she had like sex altars that would have sex with quote, the John, who would be like also an operative in the cult, who had tantric magical abilities to use the sexual energy through interacting with the sex altar, and then use that energy and take it up into the astral realm and create these grids. So they basically created artificial realities in the astral realm that they then would take people to and interact with. So they could create entire grids and realities in the astral realm, like the temple complexes. But this was before, maybe they had something so sophisticated.